What's up, everyone, and welcome to the first of 4 straight days of fantasy football rankings for the 2019 season. You've been begging me for these for basically the last month, but they haven't been ready until now because I still have had a lot of research to catch up on before they could get done. And keep in mind that these are also only the first draft. I'll have rather substantial updates throughout the entire preseason, every single week for all of my patrons over on Patreon. Just if you are a patron, go to the Patreon page, drop your email either in the comments or in a private message to me. That gives you access to kind of the rolling updated Google Sheet if you prefer it that way, or obviously I'll post them in individual updates on Patreon as well, so keep an eye out for those. But for now, at least publicly, for all the non-patrons, this is what I've got for you. If you were not with me the last couple of years, I'll break down my general draft strategy very quickly because you kind of need to understand how I approach the draft before we get into this. But in short, I prefer to keep all of my fantasy rankings separated by position and separated by round value. This allows me to see which positions are deepest in certain rounds, which then helps me to plan out which rounds I want to attack certain positions in based on value or scarcity or depth or what have you. I do include a combined position ranking for all my patrons, for those of you who still prefer to draft off a combined list, and that's coming out later this week. But personally, I do not draft that way. I feel like when I work off of a combined rankings for a draft, I get tunnel visioned on where they fall on the list rather than focusing on value and playing around certain pockets of depth throughout the draft. And I fall into traps that really bite me in the ass in the later rounds. So I just kind of keep everything separate and focus solely on those pockets of value for every single position, and usually I come out pretty okay. For instance, you can see in this overall RB ranking list, there is a ton of depth in the first 2 rounds. A lot of names that you could argue are all flirting with RB1 status, or at least will flirt with RB1 status throughout this season. And there's also some pretty solid depth in rounds 3 through 5 that can all arguably be RB2s. And then the depth kind of falls off a cliff a little bit until way later in the draft, and that's when you're getting into handcuff and kind of lottery ticket territory. So what that tells me overall is that if you go receiver early, let's say with Hopkins or Adams or Odell or whoever you prefer at wide receiver in the first round, you don't have to panic about getting 2 really good running backs with your next 2 picks, because there is a shitload of depth at the position at the top of the draft, especially in a PPR format, which will filter out all the way until late into the 3rd round or even early into the 4th round. You don't have to take a running back in the 1st round if you don't want to, because there is so many names to choose from. So just don't panic. If you really want Adams or you really want Hopkins in the 1st round, pull that trigger, because you are still easily, and I mean easily, going to be able to get 2 great running backs after getting your wide receiver 1. Now, before I go into my actual thoughts on all these names and why I have them slotted where they are, I do want to take a quick minute to thank our sponsor for this week. You know them well. Manscaped is back. It is a one-stop shop grooming company for men where you can get everything from ultra-durable ceramic trimmers to reliable and less expensive safety razors to body washes to cologne to anti-chafing deodorants or even boxer briefs. You can get each product individually or as part of a complete package for essentially half the price if you have none of those things already. Or if you do have all those products and you love them and want more of them on a regular basis, Manscaped also now offers replenish plans to send you refills at whatever time interval you choose at an even more heavily discounted rate. So if you're new to manscaping, or if you've already tried it and love the results and want more, head on over to the link in the description below and enter promo code BRETT20 for both 20% off your order of choice and free shipping. With that, let's get into these running backs and what each round value should get you, in my opinion, in terms of studs versus starters versus boomer bust flex plays versus handcuffs and late round sleepers. All those different kinds of backs are all concentrated on different areas of the draft board. So let's hit that real quick, because you kind of need that context for why I ranked everyone the way I did. First round grades obviously are for the no doubt about it studs, the guys who will pretty much always get you 17 points a game or more every single week. Usually there's not a whole lot of those consistent point producers in fantasy every single year. Last year, I believe there was only 11 running backs that hit 17 or more points per week in starting in starting appearances. James White, ironically, was one of them. He was the last at number 11, but because he was such a PPR monster, at least in PPR format, it makes sense of why he hit that, because he caught 80 plus balls, which is insanely valuable for a running back, even if he didn't score a lot. So again, you're really hunting for that 17 points per game number to be a true RB1, and there's not a whole lot of those. So all these round one guys are the ones that you can, I don't want to say guarantee they're going to hit that mark, but it's a pretty much a lock that they will. They have both a high floor and an extremely high ceiling, higher than even guys like James White. And you will play them every single week, no matter what their matchup is, because they are pretty much matchup proof. Second round grades, conversely, are for guys who could be an RB1 and could put up that consistent high floor, insanely high ceiling production, but they're less reliable or they're harder to predict for a variety of factors, whether it be durability or workload, or maybe just kind of a bad offensive line in front of them, or even a bad offensive system fit. I mean, you could make a legitimate argument for everyone in this round, the second round that is, to end up as a top 12 running back in 2019. You can argue a case for all of them to be that guy, but the reality of it is that the majority of them will not. So they are ranked in this round in order of likelihood of not completely shitting the bed, for lack of a better term. Again, most of them will not be RB1s, but all of them could be, and so they're still, in my eyes, very valuable picks at the top of the draft. Third and fourth round grades are for players who could either be consistently solid but not flashy RB2s from week to week. Maybe their ceiling isn't quite as high, but they still have a pretty substantially high floor, and they'll finish inside the top 20 for the position when it's all said and done. Or they're going to be highly volatile RB2s that technically average the same points from week to week as the other guys, but they'll do it while putting up like crazy RB1 numbers one week and then bench numbers the next. So it's really more of a gamble when you play them, but if you use them right and you have strong depth and flex players to kind of work around their less favorable matchups, you can capitalize on their strong matchups where they're going to explode, and you can get a lot of well-timed points out of them and probably win a lot of games solely because of them. And Leonard Fournette's probably the classic example of this, where he gets 26 one week and then 5 the next week. So he's averaging, 15 points a game, which is RB2 numbers, but in reality, he's going to win you one week and then lose you the next one. So it's kind of a different kind of RB2, but still an RB2 nonetheless. Round 5 and 6, again, are either flex players that you'll use on some weeks depending on your matchups and bye weeks, or in the cases of guys like White and Kollmann, they are every week starters in your flex solely because of their ability to catch the football. And I kind of alluded to that earlier with James White. He finished as the RB11 last year, maybe not popping off and having super explosive games like a lot of other RB1s, but he was so consistent and had such a high floor every week that, those kind of pass catching specialists are really good for offsetting those super volatile RB2s like Leonard Fournette, because if you just need, 15 points in this game, maybe he won't get me 30 like Fournette, but I just need 15. I need that floor. That's the kind of back that James White is, and I think the kind of back that Tariq Cohen will be as well, even if I still think David Montgomery is going to take more of Cohen's catches. But we'll get into that when we talk about those rounds specifically. But these are the kind of backs that are in these rounds, are either really valuable flex players or every week kind of stabilizing RB2s and flex players that are just going to get you reliable, consistent points. Rounds 7, 8, and 9 are all full of either priority handcuffs for the true RB1s that were already taken, like Austin Eckler for Melvin Gordon, depending on his holdout situation, or Darrell Henderson for Todd Gurley, depending on his knee, and Jalen Samuels for James Conner. Again, if he gets hurt, not saying he will, but if he gets hurt, Jalen Samuels is in line for a huge workload. Or on the other kind of back you see kind of mixed into these rounds are the very high upside young players that could ascend naturally into starting roles later in the year if the guys in front of them on the depth chart start slow, like Devin Singletary in Buffalo. He's probably the best example of that. This is the part of the draft where your starters are mostly filled out by now, and you're kind of just transitioning into acquiring depth and taking some swings for the fences on pure potential. So it's kind of a shift in mindset that you have to keep in mind and be prepared to change, the kind of pick that you're looking for as you get deeper into the draft, because your early picks will, in my opinion, almost always dictate your mid to late round picks. It's part of the reason why I break everything up by position and by round value, because you have to know what kind of players you're drafting in terms of booms, boom or bust guys, or kind of steady eddies, or RB1s that are injury prone, you need handcuffs. Like those first few picks you take will determine who you take in the back half of the draft. And that brings us to rounds 10 and up, where you're really, again, building out more depth with lower priority handcuffs, like maybe Alexander Mattison and Ito Smith, to give yourself insurance for your earlier picks like Dalvin Cook or Devonta Freeman, respectively, who both have had injury issues, as well as a ton more lottery ticket types of picks like Demarie Crockett, Karan Higdon. Both of them are going to be fighting for that RB2 job in Houston. Justice Hill, who I loved as a prospect, and Kalen Ballage, who we're still not entirely sure what his workload in Miami is going to be. There's reports of him getting a lot of snaps with the starters, but still I think Kenyon Drake is just a flat-out better back. So, Ballage is going to be one of the names that could move way up or way down, depending on what we see in preseason and the rest of camp, but I kind of slotted him there in a lower priority handcuff role for now until I can kind of figure out what he's going to be. But realistically, most of you are only going to draft one, maybe two running backs total after round 10. And as I just said, the names that you draft will be primarily determined by whoever you drafted in the first 3 rounds. But for those of you who are in larger or deeper leagues that are 14 or maybe 16 teams deep with a whole lot of roster spots, having all these names listed and ranked will be useful, because in leagues that deep, all of them and more will end up being drafted or acquired fairly early on the waiver wire. So these late round flyers and handcuffs and waiver wire targets are absolutely worth paying attention to and ranking, because at some point, one of them is going to end up carrying you to a championship. Whether you take him now or you take him in mid-September, I can promise you that. All of these guys will end up on teams at some point and being relatively big factors. So you really got to pay attention to them. But with that, let's go back to round 1 and kind of give my quick thoughts here on all these backs, broken down round by round, starting, of course, with round 1. Obviously, I, along with the rest of the human race, has Saquon Barkley at the first overall selection. I don't think it's even a debate at this point that he deserves the 1.01 pick in every single league, regardless of format. It's not even an argument to me. I think he's the most dynamic, the most dangerous, and probably will be the most productive overall multi-dimensional weapon in the entire league. You saw what he did with, in my opinion, a pretty piss-poor offensive line last year. Not a whole lot of anything going right on the Giants around him, and he was still an elite, not just fantasy option, but just an elite weapon on the actual football field. Whether it was fantasy or real football, like he was a truly dominant force to be reckoned with. You could argue that at least 2 of those wins that they had last year, which they didn't have many, but at least 2 of them were solely because of Saquon Barkley being better than everyone else on the field. He is a truly elite talent, one of the best running back talents that I've ever seen and maybe will ever see. He is truly that special. I think he's going to be at the top of fantasy drafts for probably the next 6-7 straight years, if I'm being totally honest. If he stays healthy, he's that kind of guy. He's that Adrian Peterson, LaDainian Tomlinson, like, no doubt about it, first overall pick every single year to me. He's that dominant. And then after him, I've got Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara, who you could argue for both of them at the number 2 or the number 3 spots. Personally, I've got Kamara at number 3 and McCaffrey at number 2 in forming this kind of big 3 running back trio. Christian, I think, is a lock to catch 100 balls this year, which I know it sounds crazy because that's, historically like a top 5 receiving season for any running back. And he already did it. In his second year, he put up 107 catches. So he's going to average at least 6 receptions a game, probably average at least 60 to 80 scrimmage yards a game, most likely more, which is already hitting that 17-point floor, plus touchdowns. Like, this dude's going to score probably 22, 23 points a game for you, which is elite of the elite fantasy numbers. And he's going to do it consistently, again, because there's going to be weeks where he does it mostly on the ground. There's going to be weeks where he does it mostly in the air. But he's so multidimensional as a player. You can line him up literally everywhere and he can produce for you. That's why I think he's matchup proof, because it doesn't matter what the game plan is or who the opponent is. He is so versatile that he can still score and put up incredible production. Kamara, again, is the same way. Highly effective receiver, highly effective runner, extremely versatile, pretty much matchup proof because, again, no matter what the game script is or what the opponent is, he's versatile enough that he can put up just insane points from week to week. He's going to have some games, maybe he's a little bit more volatile than Christian. He's going to have some games where maybe he puts up less than 17, but he's going to have a few games where he puts up 40. That's the kind of player he is, where he'll find a perfect matchup against, I guess it wouldn't be Tampa now because they drafted Devin White, I think specifically to stop Kamara. But, there's going to be teams that he goes up against that have slow linebackers that just will absolutely get shredded by him in the receiving game. He'll go off for 2 or 3 touchdowns in a game with 8 catches and 100 yards receiving and 80 yards rushing and just absolutely annihilate teams single-handedly. He's still going to do that, and he's still going to win you weeks virtually all by himself, which to me is worth a top 3 pick. Because if I can win fantasy games with the rest of my team dragging just because of one guy being on my roster, yeah, sign me up for that. So I've got Alvin at the 3rd overall spot. And then I got David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, and Ezekiel Elliott, all of which have been proven RB1s in the past, who all have distinct questions this year. David Johnson, obviously people are wondering how he's going to fit into the system. I think it's going to be fine because Cliff Kingsbury is going to use him as a receiver. A lot of their passing concepts kind of require pass protection checks, but not necessarily like just straight 6-man protections. Most of the time it's like, okay, shoot your eyes inside, ID the mic. If he's coming up the A-gap, he's your guy. If not, you leak out to the flat. And if nothing's there, you're going to get the ball. So I think he's going to get a lot of checkdowns. I don't specifically know how many design passing plays he's going to have outside of the screen game. Like, I don't know if they're going to be running him on seam routes or, deep sails or anything, angle routes, anything that he used to do under Bruce Arians. But I do think he's still going to catch a lot of balls at the very minimum as a safety valve, which, a catch is a catch. It's still points. So I think people are maybe overreacting a little bit too much to what the Cliff Kingsbury system is going to do to him. At Texas Tech, they didn't run the ball a lot because they didn't have a great running back, but now they do with David Johnson. I think, Cliff is a smart enough coach that you recognize you have one of the 5 best running backs in the league, you're going to use him. They just never had that at Texas Tech. So I'm not super worried about it. I think he still has a very good possibility to put up 1,500, 1,600 total yards, double-digit touchdowns, which is very easily RB1 numbers. So I think maybe the ceiling isn't as high as the top 3, but the floor is still incredibly high to me. Le'Veon Bell, you could argue at one time was the best running back in football. I still have him as an RB1 because I know what he's capable of doing. I know he can take that kind of workload, and I know the Jets want to give him that workload. I do have some questions because he took a year off, but that kind of is a double-edged argument because you could say, oh, well, now he's got fresh legs, he's healthy. He has potential to go up or down by a couple spots on this list, depending on what we see, if he even plays in the preseason. But just knowing the kind of player that Bell has been throughout his career, I'm kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt here. We know he's healthy. We know he's in shape. We know he's going to get the workload. So I'm just kind of putting my faith in the Le'Veon Bell that we saw 2 or 3 years ago and just kind of rolling with that. If I get burned by it, I'm kind of okay with that because I'd rather get burned taking a talent like Le'Veon Bell than getting burned by not taking him, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where I'm at with him. And then Zeke would probably be in my top 4, right up there with McCaffrey and Kamara and Barkley, if I had a little bit more information on his holdout situation. I'm recording this before the August 6th deadline, so I don't know if he's going to report. If he reports, I'll probably put him at the 4 spot above David Johnson. For now, I'm being a little bit cautious. If I have a draft, I guess literally today, because I'm releasing this on August 5th, if I have a draft today, I would probably take him after these guys because I don't know if he's going to show up. But if he does show up, he's right there in the top 4. He's locked in for workload. He's a true workhorse back, a true 3-down back. He's going to stay on the field on most of the snaps. I don't think he's going to bleed that many carries to any of the young backs that they brought in. And I don't think he's going to bleed that many carries to Alfred Morris either, because even though the Cowboys coaching staff adores Alfred Morris, he's not Zeke. He doesn't have the same breakaway speed to turn that wide zone that they run into a 50-yard gain. He might only get 20 or 30 yards. So it's a huge difference when you have Zeke on the field, turning average plays into spectacular plays. So he's going to get fed. We know that. The only question I have is if he's going to show up for the deadline or if he's truly serious about holding out. I guess we'll find out in the next 48 hours, in which case you want to pay attention to the first update to these rankings, because then he's going to shoot right back up to, in the top 4 spots overall. But moving on to Melvin Gordon in round 2, who is also in a similar but not quite the same situation. His holdout is structured a little bit differently in terms of reporting dates that actually affect him. I think he's a little bit more serious about holding out than Zeke is. And I think he's really not joking when he said he's prepared to sit out the full season and pull a Le'Veon Bell. And I got burned last year by Bell because I had him as my first overall pick, as you all remember, and he didn't play. So I'm a little bit more cautious about Melvin Gordon. If I knew he was coming in, obviously he'd be a first-round pick, probably a top 5 or 6 overall pick. But I don't know what he's going to do. And I'm a little bit more cautious about holdouts now after experiencing that Le'Veon Bell fiasco last year. So I've only got him as a second-round pick. I'm in wait-and-see mode. If they trade him, his value will be highly dependent on the team they trade him to, because not all offensive systems are fit for him. Not all offensive lines around the league are great. It's really hard to value him. So I'm kind of holding steady as a second-round pick, a second-round risky pick at that. And as we get more information about his holdout or potential trade or anything like that, obviously I'll update his ranking pretty regularly. Todd Gurley's in I don't want to say a similar boat because he's not requesting a trade or holding out, but a similar boat in terms of I don't really know how to value him yet because of workload and durability concerns. How many snaps is he going to get throughout the season? Like, are they going to be keeping him fresh and only giving him, 12 to 15 touches a game and not 17 to 20 touches a game? How much goal line work is he going to get versus how much work is he going to get in between the 20s? Are they just going to use him in the red zone and then let Darrell Henderson do everything else to try to keep him fresh for January? Because they don't care what his overall numbers are, and Gurley himself doesn't really care what his overall numbers are. Like, he wants a Super Bowl ring, and the Rams want a Super Bowl ring, and they know that Todd Gurley in January is their best chance to get it. So they're not going to overload him. They're not going to give him a whole lot of work because he's already got paid. He's already got his money. He doesn't care what his numbers are. They don't care what his numbers are. They drafted Darrell Henderson specifically to keep his numbers down so that he would be available and be full strength for the playoffs again, which is where they expect to be. So it's hard for me to take him in the first round knowing that it's highly likely that he will never, ever get an RB1 workload ever again. Maybe he'll get a lot of touchdowns, but I don't think the yardage is going to be with it. So he's a very, very risky pick. I think, in a big game, like if they're playing another NFC contender and they're fighting for playoff seeding, obviously he's going to get a big workload in those. But unless it's an important game, he's going to be really tough to predict here. So I think I'd probably use him more on like a daily fantasy play, like on DraftKings or something like that, than taking him as a first round pick in season long, because from week to week, we just don't know what he's going to do. And I'll talk about Darrell Henderson later because I've got him maybe slotted or valued higher than a lot of other people because I expect Henderson to get a huge share of the work. So Gurley, to me, he's a first round talent, but he's not a first round fantasy pick because I don't think the touches are going to be there. Even as efficient as he is with them, I just don't think the overall volume is going to be worth it. And there's a lot of names under him in round 2 that you could argued taking before him solely because of that volume argument, one of which being Joe Mixon, who I think is also extremely, extremely talented in terms of like pure physical talent. I think he's right up there with Todd Gurley, but he's going to get a hell of a lot more work. AJ Green's injured. He's going to miss some time. Andy Dalton pretty much is now restricted to Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon as his only truly capable weapons. I'm still not really a big John Ross guy. So Mixon is going to get a ton of work both on the ground and through the air. The Bengals' new coaching staff has made it known that they are going to be throwing a lot to running backs this year, which makes sense considering the system that Zach Taylor comes from and the system that he's been kind of brought up in as a coach. Under Sean McVay, they throw a lot to their running backs, so they're going to throw a lot to Mixon. And Mixon is a really, really gifted receiver. I think out of all the round 2 running backs that are not Gordon and not Gurley, Mixon probably has the best chance to finish as a true RB1. That 17-plus point game per ceiling, most likely 20-plus point per game kind of ceiling for him. He's going to get, I think, at least 60 catches. I think he's going to get at least 1,600 total yards, probably closer to the 1,800 and 1,900 total yard range, again, if he stays healthy. People are maybe a little bit concerned about that offensive line in Cincy, but the left side of the line, to me, isn't bad. I think if Price is healthy, Westerman actually played pretty well last year, and then Glenn, if he's healthy, like the left side of that line is not bad at all. The right side is garbage, I get that, but I mean, if at least one whole side of the line is good, you can kind of favor the run game to that side and kind of maybe spring Mixon loose a little bit more. And then once defenses cheat towards that side, that's when you hit them with counters and, crack toss and kind of play off that. So as long as the entire line isn't complete garbage, which I don't think it is, Mixon's still going to have plenty of running lanes. So I'm not knocking him too much for the team that he's on. We know he's going to get workload. We know he's talented, and we know his offensive line at least isn't, total hot garbage. It's just kind of mild garbage. So overall, I really, really like him as an early second-round pick, like very, very early second-round pick. After him, you got James Conner, who the Steelers' offensive line, I was a little bit concerned about Mike Munchak leaving, but the coaches that are taking over the line are disciples of Munchak. They've worked with the Steelers for years, so I'm not really expecting a fall-off on that line. Which is a very, very, very good offensive line, easily top 3 or 4 in the league. Conner, we know he's going to get volume. We know he's versatile as a pass catcher. Maybe not as physically gifted as all the guys in front of him here, but just from a pure volume argument, I mean, we're looking at potentially 280 to 300 touches here, which is very, very valuable in fantasy, especially in PPR, with a guy who's going to be getting 40 to 50 catches, I think, this year. So, again, not as naturally talented as a lot of the other backs in this range, but, I mean, his situation is as good as any other guy in the league. So I think he's very much worth that high second-round pick kind of investment. Dalvin Cook is another guy who I think is, A, in line for a lot of work, B, is in an offense that is perfectly tailored to his situation, C, had multiple very high-value upgrades to his offensive line and his play caller, which I kind of just broke down a little bit last week when talking about Kirk Cousins, but like that Garrett Bradbury pick was really less about Kirk Cousins and more about Dalvin Cook. Like, if you want to run a system like the one that they're going to be running under the tutelage of Gary Kubiak, who's kind of brought in to mentor Kevin Stefanski, if you're running a lot of outside zone, you can't do that without a really, really, really quick center. And so they drafted Garrett Bradbury specifically for that, so that they can run a lot of outside zone, which Dalvin Cook is very, very good at. Like, that's probably his best style of run, outside zone instead of, inside zone and power, which they had him run a lot under previous coaches. So I think he's now in an offense that he is built for, with an offensive line that they are building for it. So I'm very, very high on Dalvin. I have him a little bit lower than Mixon and Conner and Gordon and Gurley because of durability concerns. He's been banged up quite a bit in his career, but, and this is a big but, if he stays healthy, because of the system that he is now in, And because of the personnel that they have now put around him, this could be a top 10 running back that you get in the second round. And I'm not bullshitting about that at all. Like, he is just such a perfect fit. He just has to stay healthy. And he's going to get all the touches. He's going to get perfect looks with perfect play calls that are built for him. And he's going to get fed as a receiver too, because this offense likes to throw it to their running backs, especially when they kind of do those boot throwbacks that you see to Gurley all the time, who also plays in a similar system where it's pretty much just free 50-yard gains like every other week. So I'm very, very high on Dalvin. I'm more high on Dalvin than most other people are, just because I know this system very well, and I know Dalvin very well, and I think it's a match made in heaven. I just want to see him stay healthy, and he's pretty much a slam dunk top 10 running back if he stays healthy to me. Right under him, I got Nick Chubb, who, it's kind of interesting. People have been drafting him like late 2, early mid 3, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, people are more scared of Kareem Hunt and Duke Johnson than I think they should be. Kareem Hunt is really, really damn good, but he's going to be gone for like over half the fantasy season. And Nick Chubb himself is very, very good. I think you could argue that Nick Chubb as a player is just as good as Kareem Hunt, except even more naturally gifted as a runner. Like, he's more explosive. I think he's got better long speed than Hunt, and he's just as good as a receiver. So, like, I'm not really scared of Kareem Hunt. Like, if Chubb gets hurt, obviously Kareem Hunt's a true RB1. We know he can do that, but like, if you expect Kareem Hunt to come in and all of a sudden take 60% of the snaps after Chubb, gets 1,000 yards in his first 8 or 9 games, like, no, that's just not going to happen. Coaches in the NFL, I know several running back coaches, like, they're pretty risk averse when it comes to production. Like, if you're already producing, they're not going to take you off the field. Like, if you're on a roll, especially at the running back position, if you're on a roll, they're going to try to keep you on a roll, because a true 3-down back that can carry the load and relieve pressure on the rest of the offense is incredibly valuable to coaching staffs around the league. It makes their job a whole lot easier. So if Nick Chubb is producing, and I think he will, because, for God's sake, look at the offense around him, he's not going to get yanked in the middle of a potential 18 to 1,700 yard season with double-digit touchdowns. Like, they're not going to pull him off the field when he's in the middle of that. If they do, you should just start firing people right now, because that is absolutely crazy to me. I don't think I've ever seen a running back who is that productive all of a sudden get benched for an on-the-field reason. Off the field, obviously, yeah, we've seen that before. We just saw it with Kareem Hunt last year, but if he's producing on the field, there's no on-the-field reason why they wouldn't keep feeding him. So this Kareem Hunt argument it's dumb to me. It doesn't matter. I don't care if Kareem Hunt's the backup. I still think Chubb is going to start no matter what. I still think he's going to be productive no matter what. And when you look at the overall Cleveland Browns offense and how many red zone touches they're going to generate for him because of their explosiveness overall as a team, like, he has a very, very decent chance of leading the league in touchdowns. So to be honest, by the time week 1 rolls around, I might have him ranked even higher than this. For now, I've got him as kind of a mid to late second round pick, but don't be shocked if I move him up, because he is, his situation is perfect to me. And that brings us to Kerryon Johnson, who I'm probably ranking him a lot higher than most other people. I think he's going kind of early 3rd as his average draft position these days. He started out, early July as like a 4th round pick, then kind of moved up into the 3rd round once Theo Riddick got released. I've been taking him mid 2 to late 2 pretty much this entire time. I think that's probably where his ADP is going to end up, because he is, to me, I did a video on it a couple seasons ago in his rookie year, or I guess it would be last year in his rookie year. This dude's basically Alvin Kamara to me in terms of skill set. I think he is a true 3-down back with excellent receiving ability, excellent vision. His jump cut is very Kamara / Le'Veon Bell-esque. Maybe not as much of a slasher as Kamara, but just in terms of stop-start quickness, his ability to get skinny in a hole, contact balance through tackles. He reminds me a lot of Alvin Kamara. And if he stays healthy, which is the main reason why I have him ranked here and not higher up with, the Mixons and Connors, is just durability. Even going back to his college days, he would get banged up fairly often. So I don't know if he's going to be healthy for the whole year. I mean, he didn't even make it through his rookie year without getting a knee injury. But if he is healthy, I mean, good Lord, he's going to be probably a top 12 running back, and I have zero doubt about that. His efficiency per touch is truly off the charts. And I think when you look at the history of Darrell Bevell, like when he's got a really talented running back, whether it's Adrian Peterson or Marshawn Lynch, like he's going to feed him. He's going to get touches. He just has to stay healthy with all those touches, and he's going to finish as a true RB1. But again, durability is why I've got him ranked here and not ranked 6 to 8 spots higher. But just know that if he does stay healthy and he puts up top 10 to 12 RB numbers, I told you so. I mean, the kid is incredibly talented, and I think he's going to be one of the few reasons why Detroit is a wild card contender by the time December rolls around. He's probably the best player they've got on offense right now. And now, speaking of really, really good offenses, Damian Williams is not the best player on his offense, but he's still a really, really good fantasy option because of all the better fantasy options around him. When you look at Pat Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, maybe not Mahomes, but at the very least, Kelce and Hill will probably be drafted before Williams, but Williams will reap a lot of the benefits of those guys on the field. Kelce and Hill alone are going to be setting up a lot of red zone opportunities for him with explosive plays, and when Williams gets in the red zone, he's very, very good at getting in the end zone. So I think they're going to lean on him a lot. In goal line situations, or it really just carries inside the 10 in general. He's a very tough runner between the tackles. I think if, maybe defenses kind of try to take Travis away on fades or anything like that, like they're really going to lean on. They actually have a really interesting run game, not to get too far off track, but Andy Reid's run game, and you see this also with the Colts under Reich and Peterson with the Eagles, their red zone running game is very well designed in terms of how they create angles with pullers and traps and whams and all sorts of bells and whistles with motions. Like they run the ball in the red zone in a very intriguing way by, even if you line up with a whole lot of beef on the front, they don't really try to overpower you. They just try to out-angle you. And Damian Williams is very good at taking those angles, and then when you're left one-on-one with a safety, like he can finish that run. So, again, not to get too far off the subject here, but one of these days I kind of want to do an episode on the Reid coaching tree and how they design their run games against really heavy fronts, because they don't really smash you in the mouth. They just kind of almost like guide and direct those heavy fronts away from where the play is going in very, very subtle and creative ways. And it's kind of hard to explain without video, but I kind of love watching the design of the run game. I think it's the most creatively designed run game in the league. And, Williams is obviously a huge benefactor of that. So I've got him as a late second round pick. You could argue maybe taking him mid second round because, again, he's in the best offense in the NFL. He's going to get a whole lot of red zone touches and convert a whole lot of those to touchdowns, which are worth a lot of points. But, for now, I've got him as a late 2 just because I think from a physical talent standpoint, there's a whole lot of guys that are more naturally talented than him. And if they get a similar amount of touches, I think would be more efficient with those touches than Williams. But still, just in terms of situation-wise, Williams is in one of the best situations in the league. So he's a pretty safe pick as far as kind of RB2, like high-end RB2s go. He's very, very safe, very, very high floor. Devonta Freeman, same kind of thing. A whole lot of talent around him in an offensive system that Atlanta has thrived in before. So, I'm not really worried about the transition back to a dirt cutter system. If anything, I consider that a benefit to no longer be under Steve Sarkisian, because Sarkisian, if anything, to me, held back the offensive talent on that roster. Like, they were already pretty productive, but they should have been even more productive. But Steve just didn't really maximize their talent as well as I think he could have. So if anything, going back to dirt cutter, I think is a benefit for Freeman. He's a very dependable running back. The main reason why I've got him slotted here is durability concerns, which is kind of a common theme with this second round. Guys that very easily could finish as top 12 running backs, but you've got durability concerns, so you're not super confident in them playing every single game. Devonta, whether it's leg injuries or concussions, he's been banged up quite a bit the last few years. But when he's on the field, he's going to get the rock 17 to 20 times a game. Tevin Kollmann is no longer there to vulture a whole lot of work from him. Ito Smith is going to vulture some work, but I don't think he's going to vulture as much as Tevin did. So I think when they get inside the 5-yard line, that's going to be Devonta Freeman all the way. I don't think they're going to give the ball to Ito Smith because Freeman has way better power and contact balance. He's going to be way more efficient converting touchdowns inside that 5 or 10-yard line. And he's also a very good receiver. He's a good pass protector. He's just, in general, really, really gifted, both outside and inside zone runner, which they're mostly going to be running this year. He's just a really damn good running back. He's very, very reliable as long as he stays healthy. And if I went receiver in the first round, early in the first round, maybe at the 5 spot after the big 4 were gone, or I guess big 3 plus Zeke were gone, if I went Hopkins or Adams there and then came back in the late second round and the only running back I could get was Freeman, I'd be totally fine with that. I would obviously handcuff him with Ito Smith later, but I would be 100% fine with Freeman as my quasi RB1 because if he's on the field, he's going to be producing a lot for me. Aaron Jones, similar kind of story. If he's on the field, which he's a little bit banged up with a hamstring right now, it's not as serious as Jamal Williams' hamstring, but if he's on the field, I think he's going to be incredibly productive. They've been trying to find ways to work him in more as a receiver under Matt LaFleur's new offense, which I think they didn't do a good enough job in under Mike McCarthy, but LaFleur is trying to fix that by integrating him more as a receiver. Again, it's kind of a theme of all these Shanahan teams, whether it's San Francisco or LA or Minnesota or now Green Bay. Pretty much anybody that's running that style of offense, they like to throw to the running back. So they're going to be throwing to Aaron Jones significantly more, which ups his PPR value. The main reason why I have him here and not higher, just like with Freeman and Kerryon, is durability. And Dalvin is durability. We know that when he's on the field, he's going to be productive. He's going to have an argument to be an RB1 in and out every single week when he is on the field because of them throwing him probably 4 or 5 balls a game. I think you can lock him in for 60 catches, or 4 or 5 targets a game with 60 catches. I think you can lock him in for that. I think you can lock him in for probably 12 to 15 carries a game. And so that gives you 17 touches, and with his per touch efficiency, now you're all of a sudden you're looking at top 12 to 15 running back numbers. So again, if he's on the field, he's going to be worth a start every single week, regardless of matchup. And I think it just comes down to how many touches they're going to give him and what's his durability going to hold up as all the way into December. Is that hamstring going to linger, or are they going to rest him for all of August and have him be 100% healthy by September? If it were me, I would, but that's just me. So we'll see. He has a potential to move way up or way down based on injury news or how he's recovering from that hamstring, as well as maybe any sort of snippets that we can gather about what his workload is going to be. Because I know they are talking about running the dreaded running back by committee, which LaFleur did to Derrick Henry's detriment last year. Until he finally started feeding Derrick in the last month and a half, and surprise, surprise, he put up incredible numbers. So I don't know if he's learned his lesson from that in Tennessee, and if he's just going to look at the best running back on his team and feed him this time like he should have last year. But Jones is tough to judge because you don't 100% trust LaFleur, you don't 100% trust the hamstring, but you know that if the stars align and he gets the workload and he's healthy, I mean, this dude's going to be an every week starter for you. So very much worth a late second round pick just for that potential alone. And then we'll kind of adjust accordingly as we get more news on both of those issues over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Moving on to round 3 now, we've got Leonard Fournette topping this. There's really only 3 guys that I kind of see as round 3 values. It's a rather thin round, to be honest, but Fournette, I think, tops those 3 because he is like the ultimate poster child for boom or bust. I think there are certain matchups that he is a must start in. Like, if you're going up against a lighter, faster front 7, that I think fits Jacksonville very favorably because they are a whole lot of beef up front. They're going to run power, they're going to run ISO, and they're going to run right over those lighter defensive fronts and absolutely demolish them. And Fournette's going to be a big benefactor of that. And that's when he's going to put up his 25 to 30 point games, is when they go up against smaller, lighter, faster defensive fronts that are more built to stop the pass. But if they're going up against maybe heavier defensive fronts that have, 3 big-ass two-gappers right in the middle and at least one big, beefy 240-plus Mike linebacker, they're going to struggle a little bit against that because those are the defenses that are built to stop power run games. And while Fournette, yes, he's got good contact balance, and I think he can still make a little something out of nothing, even if he's going against really, really tough interior defensive lines, you also have to factor in durability. I think because of the fact that he's kind of matchup dependent and the durability factor, and that he's pretty much always been hurt every single year that he's played football since he left high school, it's hard to take him anything higher than round 3. Could he put up incredible numbers and finish as a top 12 to 15 fantasy back? Absolutely. Will he do it every week? Pretty much no. Like I don't think that there's really any way that he is a consistent point producer, both due to durability and due to matchup dependency. I know they want to throw him the ball more. I know they want to run maybe a little bit more outside with him and get him involved more on tosses and outside zone and stuff like that. But I don't think they're going to. I think that's kind of lip service at this point. I'm more in like okay, prove it to me by showing it kind of state with Fournette, because it's been 2 straight years of me going to bat for him and saying, this is the year he's going to be healthy. This is the year he's going to be consistent. And it just hasn't happened. So I know what the ceiling is. I graded the dude at LSU as one of the best running back prospects I've ever seen. I know what his ceiling is. It's incredible. It's Todd Gurley. It's Saquon Barkley kind of ceiling, but he has never even come close to that. And I don't know if he will. So I think round 3 is fair to take him just on upside alone, but I would not under any circumstances take him before round 3 because it's too risky and it's too heartbreaking, to be honest. Marlon Mack, conversely, is a much more consistent option. Nowhere near the ceiling of Fournette, but I think in terms of consistency, when you look at the offense he's in with the line that's blocking for him and his efficiency per touch, he is going to be in a little bit more of a committee, and he is not as physically gifted as a lot of the guys ahead of him in these rankings, but just in terms of pure situation, and in terms of the line that's blocking for him, I mean, it's pretty much any running back is going to have success behind that line, if we're being honest. I mean, you run gap right behind Quentin Nelson, and it's 4 yards for free. It's essentially 4 yards for free. I think if you run power left and you're pulling and you're having Nelson down blocking and you get like a really good seal on that pull and you kind of kick out that safety that's coming down to fill, I mean, that's a hell of a lot more than 4 yards. That's, for them, at least last year, that was like 15 to 20 yards, pretty much automatically. Like they were so damn good at running power left. But anyway, that's besides the point. Marlon Mack, not super gifted, but he's in a phenomenal situation with a phenomenal offensive line. And I think just in terms of pure consistency, I'm really not drafting Mack the player. I'm drafting the Colts offense. I'm drafting all of their red zone opportunities. I'm drafting their offensive line. I'm drafting all the touches he's going to get. And I'm drafting all of the narrative coming out of Colts camp that they are going to try to throw him the ball more as well. So again, Mack the player almost doesn't even matter to me. Just the starting Colts running back, whatever name that may be, is what I'm drafting in the 3rd round. And that just happens to be Marlon Mack. So I'm pretty high on that offense in general, and Mack's going to be the beneficiary. And I think you could take him as a third-round pick and be totally comfortable with that. Derrick Henry, staying inside the AFC South, I think is another one of those volatile, almost Leonard Fournette-ish type of running backs where, we saw it last year, like the last kind of 10 games were a microcosm of what Derrick Henry brings you, where he does nothing, absolutely nothing, and then he wins you a championship. I mean, Derrick Henry was on waivers in a lot of leagues, and then he had one big game, people picked him up, and he carried them all the way to a championship. And that, if he didn't have that last 5 or 6 week stretch, obviously he wouldn't be a third round pick. And there are people that are saying, well, I can't just draft him based on 5 weeks. And I'm thinking, why the hell not? The coaches saw what he did. The coaches saw what happened when they fed him. They saw how productive he can be when you commit to him. Why won't they do it again? I talked about this with Nick Chubb. If you're rolling, it doesn't matter who else is on the roster. It doesn't matter what happened before. Like, if you're rolling, they're going to feed your ass. And Henry was rolling at the end of last year. So I think there's a very good chance that they're going to remember that. And they're going to try to get him rolling again, because when Derrick Henry was good, the Titans were good. And they want to be a playoff team. And they're not going to be a playoff team without running the ball down people's throats. Marcus Mariota is not a good enough quarterback to carry them to the playoffs. They need a strong run game. And I think they're going to get that with Henry. I think they're going to commit to him, and I think they're going to give him 20 touches a game. And he's at the very minimum going to be a goal line monster, which is worth a third round pick in itself. But when you throw in all the yardage on top of that, again, this is another guy where you can argue he's going to be a top 15, 16 running back if he gets the workload. I'm taking him round 3 because I can't guarantee he's going to get the workload. But if he does, I'm going to look like a friggin' genius getting him this late. But I'm going to be conservative. I'm not going to go overboard like I did last year, where I was preaching the gospel of Derrick Henry to anybody who would listen. I recognize that sometimes coaches can screw up and not give the best running back on the team carries. But I'm still very optimistic about him, and I think if he does get carries and he does get the work, he's going to win you a championship. Just flat out, that's how I feel about him. We'll wait and see to see if he does get the work, but I truly hope that they learn their lesson, because it was a very, very hard lesson for them to learn. Moving on to round 4. I'm a pretty big David Montgomery fan. I know I got a lot of flack from Bears fans for saying that I would have preferred if they drafted Damian Harris over David Montgomery, because I had a higher grade on Harris coming out of Alabama than Montgomery coming out of college. But that doesn't mean that I don't love Montgomery as a player. I just happen to love Harris more. From a fantasy perspective, though, I think whoever was going to be the starting running back in Chicago, which obviously it's Montgomery now, is going to be highly productive. And so I've got him as my top rookie running back because of the team that he's on. And of course, he also happens to be a really damn good football player. Great inside the tackles runner. Breaks through contact at a pace that is just unbelievable. His contact balance is tremendous. He doesn't quite have the juice on the second level as maybe as some other rookie running backs in this class, but just in terms of pure grind it out, beat you to a pulp kind of runner, which is what they really want in Chicago, but also having kind of the quickness and agility to do those really, really, really sharp cutbacks on outside zone, which Jordan Howard maybe couldn't do as well, and also having the hands to be an effective receiver, which Jordan Howard couldn't do as well. Pretty much the only thing that Montgomery is missing is just long speed. But if he gets 3 20-yard runs in a game, that's just as good as 1 60-yard run. So I'm not super worried about his overall level of production. We know he's going to get fed like a workhorse. We know he's a true 3-down back. He's going to get a hell of a lot more catches than Howard ever would have. They're going to be running a wider variety of runs because they're not just restricted to inside zone like they were with Jordan. So overall, I'm very, very optimistic about what Montgomery brings to this team and what this team can bring to Montgomery from a fantasy perspective. This offense is loaded from top to bottom. They're going to have a very productive offense with a lot of red zone opportunities for him to convert. I would not be shocked if he led all rookies in touchdowns his first year. In fact, I would probably imagine that he's the prevailing bet to do so out of all the rookie running backs. So overall, I'm a very, very big Montgomery fan. I think as an early fourth-round pick, if you do go receiver early and you kind of want to do your next 3 picks as running backs and then hit receiver again in the mid-rounds because there's some really good values for receiver in the mid-rounds, I think Montgomery as your RB3 or RB2 into flex territory is perfectly acceptable. I think he's going to get the work, and I think he's talented enough to be efficient with that work. Phillip Lindsay is one that I'm very fascinated by because I don't know overall what his workload is going to be. I think they are going to split in that backfield a little bit more, but I think he's also a perfect fit for what they do, which again is that kind of Shanahan style. We're running outside zone, we're bootlegging off of that. He is a extremely efficient runner in outside zone, specifically because he has the speed to press the corner, which most outside zone runners ironically don't have. You really want speed when you're running outside zone, but most starting running backs do not have Phillip Lindsay's speed. Like, he's a legit, high 4.3, low 4.4 kind of guy, whereas a lot of running backs around the league that are in this system are really more like, 4.5 flat kind of guys. So he's one of the faster running backs that you're going to see in this system around the league. Which then translates to a much higher efficiency in this system. So even if he doesn't get as many touches as, say, Dalvin Cook, even if he doesn't get as many touches, he's still going to be more efficient with them, which makes me think that he'll still put up pretty substantial RB2 numbers. In the red zone, I'm not sure if he's going to get as much work as maybe Royce Freeman, because Freeman is a little bit more naturally powerful. And at least in this system, when you're in the red zone, it's a lot of inside zone, lower your shoulder and run through people, which Freeman to me is better than Lindsay at doing. He's not very big. So I don't know what his touchdown potential is going to be, but at least in terms of yardage, both on the ground and in the air, I think he's going to be highly productive. I think he is an every week RB2/flex kind of player, depending on what your team composition is and obviously what your format is. But I'm not worried about him putting up consistent numbers at all. There are going to be weeks where he pops off when he packages all that yardage with touchdowns, but I don't expect that every week. But still, his floor just from yardage and catches is still very, very high. So I'm very confident in him as an early to mid 4th round pick. Sony Michel, I think my only question with him, again, it comes back to durability. He doesn't miss a lot of games, but just he always seems to be banged up, and he worries me a little bit with the lower body injuries. It just seems like he's never 100%. But even though he's never 100%, he's still pretty damn productive. So it's hard for me to let him slip out of the 4th round, because for the first time in a long time, Bill Belichick actually committed to a 3-down workhorse running back, which was Sony Michel. I can't remember the last time he did that, and that they weren't an impossible to decipher committee in New England. But Sony Michel was that guy, at least in the last half of the season, and especially in the playoffs. They gave the ball to him, and they gave it to him a lot, and it worked. And so I think they're going to go back to that again this year, again as long as he's healthy. I think they're going to ride him. I think he's going to get 20 touches a game, and maybe won't be as efficient with those touches as some of the other guys I have ahead of him, like Phillip Lindsay or even Aaron Jones or Kerryon Johnson. But I think if you give him that work and you give him that workload and he's healthy, he's an every week RB2 for you at a minimum, maybe a much higher ceiling than that even. But RB2 to flex, he's an easy call for me in the 4th round. I would feel very comfortable taking him there. And that is the first Patriots running back that I felt comfortable taking in the first 4 rounds in a long time. At least, the first early down running back that I felt comfortable taking. Going back to the days of Law Firm and all that kind of stuff. It's he's going to get all the goal line work. Cool, but he didn't get much more than that. Sony Michel is going to get more than that. He's going to get the goal line work and the between the 20s work and some receiving work. I think he's, for once, finally in line for a true RB1 workload in New England, which is, I can't remember the last time that happened. Moving on to Josh Jacobs, who is the 2nd ranked rookie running back that I've got. Obviously, he's more naturally talented than Montgomery. He was my highest graded rookie running back by a decent margin in this past draft class, but the situation that he's in compared to David Montgomery is nowhere close. I do not have any faith in the Raiders' offensive line, not because I don't think they're talented. They do have a lot of talent on that team, but Tom Cable consistently has been the worst offensive line coach in the league. And I think when you look back at some of the run games that he has killed with his offensive line in the past, or at the very least, he's mitigated run games from what they could have been. You know, people point to the rushing yards per game that Seattle had when he was there, but that was like prime beast mode that was breaking tackles at an incredible rate, and Russell Wilson when they were running a whole lot of options and all that kind of stuff, and Wilson was getting a ton of rushing yards as well. So he was propped up by two Hall of Fame players kind of outplaying their own offensive line. Like, Tom Cable's offensive line was not good. It was never good in Seattle. I don't care what anybody says about overall rushing production. They were terrible under him. So when you look at the Raiders, like, they're not going to be running a whole lot of option with Derek Carr. He's not Russell Wilson. And that it then relies on Josh Jacobs to then basically be Marshawn Lynch and do it all himself, which I don't think he's going to be beast mode like that. Like, he's very, very good running back, very versatile, great receiver, extremely talented, very good contact balance, but you're basically asking him as a rookie to be a Hall of Fame caliber running back. And we just don't know that he's going to be that guy yet. So yes, he's going to get the workload. Yes, he's versatile and he's going to catch a lot of balls. And I think he's going to make a lot of just incredible plays as a rookie, but I have him as a 4th round pick solely because of Tom Cable. Because I think that Tom Cable, no matter what, will find a way to screw this offense like he always does. I can't believe he's still even employed, but that's the reality of the situation. I think Josh Jacobs in a dynasty league, easily 1st overall pick because Jacobs is a better player than every other running back in his class. But just in a pure redraft context, it's it's tough for me to bet on that offensive line. I would love to be proved wrong, but history shows like there's a clear pattern of ineptitude wherever Tom Cable goes, and so I'm not ultra confident in that Raiders running game. I'll leave it at that. And then after Jacobs, I got kind of old reliable, another Alabama running back. That's Mark Ingram, who is going to Baltimore. Weirdly enough, they just released Alex Lewis right before I recorded this. That kind of came out of nowhere for me, so I got to do some research to figure out what that's about. They must be confident in their guard depth, so maybe I got to do a little bit more work on Ingram, and I'll kind of rethink this ranking a little bit later. But at the very least, we know that Baltimore is going to run the hell out of the ball a lot. They kind of have to with Lamar Jackson as their quarterback. But Lamar Jackson is also going to open things up for Ingram. You know, his ability to freeze those backside unblocked defenders, which then kind of frees up a tackle or a tight end to hit the second level and open up a seam for Ingram. Like, Gus Edwards was productive in this offense, and Gus Edwards is nowhere near the running back that Ingram is. So I think they specifically went after Ingram because they wanted to maximize that downhill running back role, but also get somebody who could, make somebody miss at some point, which Edwards just didn't do, but Ingram can. Not to mention Ingram is also a better receiver and a better pass protector. So I think he's going to be on the field a lot. I think he's going to get a ton of snaps, a ton of carries, and even if he's kind of getting up there in age, just because of the offense that he's in and how it's going to be built to create as much success as a runner as possible for him, I'm pretty confident in him as like an RB2 to flex play in the 4th round. Like I think that's a pretty good value for him. This is probably going to be the last time I take Ingram in the 4th round or higher just because of his age. But, if there was any year for an older running back to really pop off, I think it's Ingram, and I think it's this year. Moving on to round 5, we got the first of the kind of sole pass-catching specialist backs that I mentioned earlier that give you that really, really high floor, and that's James White. I think he's in for another 80-catch season. I think he's going to catch at least 5 balls a game. And, if you're putting up 5 catches a game and you're averaging 60 to 70 total yards between those catches and a few carries, and maybe you get half a touchdown a game, all of a sudden you're averaging 15 points, 16 points a game. Maybe you're never going to get 30, but if you're averaging 15 to 16, or even last year he was averaging 17 points a game, like that is extremely consistent, extremely reliable, and extremely valuable, because that consistency can at least sometimes help offset volatility elsewhere on your roster. There's a lot of volatile players in this league that can either win you games or lose you games, and James White is the kind of guy who can help cover for those down weeks from your more volatile players, whether it's Fournette or Tyreek Hill or what have you. So I think he is a 5th round value for that alone, to kind of bring a stabilizing presence to your roster. Tariq Cohen in round 6, we'll get into him when we get there, but same kind of thing. And, PPR as a format allows you to take these guys in the 5th round, because these are the only formats where those kind of running backs are valuable. If you got a running back that's catching 87 balls in a season and essentially putting up wide receiver numbers, like, he deserves a roster spot. So I'm very comfortable with him in the 5th round. Moving on to Kenyon Drake. Drake is someone who I don't really have a good read on that Dolphins backfield yet, so his ranking is probably going to change pretty substantially, whether up or down. There's kind of a lot of chatter about Kalen Ballage taking a lot of carries from him with the first team. I'm not sure if I believe that that's what's going to happen in the regular season, because to me, Drake is just like flat out a much better running back. So I'm monitoring that, but I don't necessarily believe it yet. I think Drake, even if he's not getting 20 carries a game or 20 touches a game, and he's getting 15 touches a game, he is so explosive and so efficient, and he can turn any one of those touches into a big play and a touchdown. I think he's very easy to start as a flex every single week, and a very high upside flex at that. I'm monitoring this Ballage stuff, and we'll see how it goes. But at the moment, it just kind of doesn't make sense to me. What does make sense to me is Miles Sanders already kind of eclipsing everyone else on the Eagles depth chart. There's been talk of him potentially being the day one starter. I think he will be, or at least he should be. I think by the time we see what he's capable of in the preseason, he's going to be the no doubt starter in Philly. I think he's the most talented back on that team by a mile. An absolute mile. Like, I don't care that Jordan Howard's there, and I love Jordan Howard. I think Jordan Howard is a very high floor handcuff for Sanders, but there's a lot of things that Sanders can do on the football field that Jordan Howard could never dream of. He's faster, he's quicker, he's got better hands. Howard doesn't really have hands at all, actually. Like, the one thing that Howard can do that Sanders maybe can't is like pass protect well, but that's about it. So I think whether you're running wide zone, inside zone, power, gap, trap, wham, like whatever you want to run, Sanders is talented enough to do it. So that versatility, his natural long speed, he's a much better breakaway runner than Howard ever. Like, there is no conceivable scenario for me where Sanders is not the week 1 starter. I think I think it was obvious the day he was drafted he was going to be, no matter who else was there. And I think as we've gotten through training camp and we've seen him absolutely ripping up that Eagles defense in practice, and I think as we see him rip up other teams' defenses in preseason, I would honestly be surprised if he's still there in round 5 by the time we hit like the 3rd or 4th week of preseason. This is probably the lowest I will ever have him ranked. So I think he's a really tremendous value if you happen to be drafting this week. If you get him in round 5, that's a tremendous value, because in 3 weeks you're probably not going to be able to. Now, moving on to Chris Carson, this is another one who is also going to be in flux, just like Drake and Sanders, but Carson might move down. I think round 5 might be the highest that I take Carson, injury notwithstanding, because I like Rashad Penny a lot. Like, Rashad Penny is a more talented running back than Carson. And I got Penny as a 6th-round pick. I'll talk about him in a second. But I think people are kind of underestimating Rashad Penny. I think people are maybe glossing over too much that Penny is probably going to be the primary passing down back in this offense, not Chris Carson. Like, Penny is a better receiver than Carson. He's got better long speed. He's shiftier. I think he's a better route runner. Carson, pass protection is probably about the same, but I think when you put Penny on the field, you want to get him matched up with linebackers because I think he can toast most of the linebackers in this league. Like, he's a very, very athletic running back with very, very good hands. So Carson is obviously the lead dog for early down work right now. He's got better contact balance. I think he's got better pad level. Like, he's definitely a better goal line back and better short yardage back. But like, this just screams committee to me, which it doesn't help Carson, for especially in PPR for him to be in a committee. And if Penny's getting the majority of catches in this offense, that limits Carson's ceiling a lot, because that means that Penny has a better chance to eclipse Carson as a 3-down back than Carson has to eclipse Penny as a 3-down back. That's just the nature of the beast right now. So yes, I would take Carson in round 5 right now, because we know that he's going to get a lot of goal line work, and we know that he's going to be the primary early down back. But, by late October, early November, it's conceivable that Penny overtakes him on the depth chart. So you have to be cautious about that. Monitor their situations very closely, both in training camp and in the preseason. Injuries are going to play a big factor, obviously, but this is a backfield to watch, because I don't think this depth chart is set in stone at all. And if anything, we might be seeing Penny rocket up draft boards in a few weeks and Carson fall pretty substantially. Now, moving on to round 6, because I've been talking about basically all these guys in other rounds. Tariq Cohen, again, similar to James White. David Montgomery is going to steal a lot of work from him, but they still run a lot of 2-back sets in Chicago, so it's not like it's going to affect his snap counts that much. I still think he's going to get 4 catches, maybe 5 catches a game to end up somewhere between 60 and 80. I don't think he's going to get the same kind of passing volume that James White gets, but he's still going to get pretty good passing volume. But, any one of those screens can go for a 50-yard touchdown at any given moment. So his ceiling is higher than White. His floor is lower. So that's why I've got him around later. And obviously Montgomery is going to be stealing some of that receiving work that Howard did not steal. So that's something to consider as well. But overall, I think Cohen is a very strong week-to-week flex play. Matchup dependent a little bit more than White, but I think overall I would feel comfortable in my flex each and every single week because of his ceiling as a player, because of his big playability. I would feel very comfortable with that. Tevin Kollmann, this is the first 49ers running back that I've got. And to be honest, I don't really know what to make of that backfield yet. I think they brought in Tevin Kollmann for a reason, because they believe he can be their starter. I know that Kyle Shanahan loves the guy, like absolutely loves him. Like I remember a couple years ago, I was talking to some people that work for the Falcons, and even back then, they expected when Kyle first went to San Francisco, even back then they expected him to eventually go to San Francisco. Like, they are very, very close. The Falcons knew he was probably going to end up going there no matter who else was on the roster, and he did. And I think it's fair to assume that out of everyone in that backfield, Kollmann is the biggest bet to be a lead dog, because Kyle brought him in specifically for that. In terms of the actual split for carries, that's a little bit tougher to discern, because even if Tevin is the starter and the main running back, that still doesn't mean that he's going to be getting 17 to 20 touches a game. Like, he could still be getting 12 to 15 touches while Breida gets some and McKinnon gets some, and there's so many friggin' running backs on that team that I can't figure out what the split is going to be. And I don't think that, like, somebody's got to get traded, somebody's got to get released for me to make better sense of this. The only thing I know as of right now is that Tevin Kollmann is the starter, but I can't predict his workload, and I can't predict anything beyond the 12 to 15 touches, which is fine. Like, you can get by on 12 to 15 touches, but that's like a flex workload, but that is not a true, at least consistent RB2 workload. Like I don't know. This backfield confuses me. Like, this actually reminds me of the old Patriots backfield, where there was just a million guys on the roster and you never really knew what to do with them. And it felt like if you had multiple of them, you were going to be wrong no matter what. And I feel like I'm going to be wrong no matter what on the 49ers. So I kind of depressed their value, all of them, a little bit. I put Tevin Kollmann as the first one in round 6 as a flex player at best until we can figure out exactly what's going on with the split in that backfield. So expect his ranking to change. I don't know what direction it's going to change yet. Lamar Miller is probably in the exact opposite scenario. Like, we know he's the starter. We know he's going to get the workload, at least in the first half of the year. I think, between Demarie Crockett and Karan Higdon, there's a decent chance that they start eating into his workload in the second half of the year, because Lamar Miller, to me, is like the definition of an average running back, and I don't think he's special at all. I don't think he's good enough to keep 2 undrafted rookies from eating into his carries. Like, he's not that good. But for now, especially after the Deontay Foreman release, and I don't even have Foreman ranked anymore because of that, because we don't even know what team he's going to be on. But after that Foreman release, like, it's pretty clear that at least in the first half of the year, Lamar Miller is going to get the work. And he's in a very explosive offense that's going to give him a lot of red zone opportunities. So I think 6th round is fair, again, as a flex play. But you kind of have to be aware that he might not be the starter in Houston all year. And if you invest in Miller, it's definitely worth it to keep an eye on the Crockett versus Higdon battle for the RB2 spot in camp and preseason, because I think there's a decent chance that one of those guys replaces Miller as the starter by, like, Thanksgiving. But we'll get into them a little bit later as well. And then the last guy in round 6 that I've got, again, that I alluded to before, was Rashad Penny. Again, I think he's going to be the primary passing down back in Seattle at first, with a decent chance to overtake Carson as the starter. So I've only got them separated by 1 round, and they could very easily flip-flop their position within a couple weeks here. So we're going to keep an eye on that, and I'll update these rankings accordingly over on Patreon as we get more information about that battle. Round 7 now, I've got Darius Geis, who is slated to be the starter in Washington. Durability is obviously a concern with him, but the reports about his hamstring seem to be unfounded. It looks like his hamstring's okay, but there's the ACL last year, which was more unfortunate than anything, but we're still not 100% sure what he's going to look like, coming back from that. I think in a couple weeks after we see him in preseason action, if he even plays in preseason, who knows if he will. If we see that same kind of explosiveness and jump cut ability and acceleration that we saw at LSU, yeah, I'll probably move him pretty significantly up the board, because I loved him coming out of LSU. But I'm in kind of wait and see mode with him. I just want to see what he looks like in a game setting, and then I'll kind of rank him accordingly. But for now, I think round 7's fair. Again, as a flex option, borderline low-end RB2 kind of option. Austin Eckler is a pure handcuff in round 7 for the Melvin Gordon situation. If Gordon, I knew, was not going to hold out, Eckler would not be this high. I would probably have him a round or 2 later, but the fact that we don't know that Gordon's going to play at all this year moves Eckler up into round 7. And I feel pretty comfortable taking him there, at the very least, as Gordon insurance. I think if Gordon doesn't play, Eckler's in line for a really big workload, and he's going to be highly productive with it, like we just saw last year. Even with Gordon on the field, Eckler was pretty damn productive. So I feel pretty good about him as a very high priority handcuff. And again, this is the part of the draft where we start getting into those handcuffs for RB1s. And that brings me to Darrell Henderson, who's the next guy that I got in round 7. He is my Todd Gurley insurance, and I mainly have him in round 7 instead of the round, I think it's like round 8 or round 9 ADP that he's got right now. I think there's a decent chance that he gets a pretty significant workload in between the 20s, while Gurley really just kind of cleans up in the red zone. And, if Gurley gets hurt, or if his knee swells up again, Henderson's in line to get a huge, monstrous workload in a highly productive offense and be C.J. Anderson all over again. And C.J. Anderson really carried some people late in the year last year. So I think he's worth a 7-round pick as a very high priority handcuff, or potentially even as a flex play if we see him getting a bigger workload than people expect. If they're giving out 30 touches a game to their running backs and Henderson's getting 16 or 17 of them, while Gurley just kind of does the quote-unquote important work on like key third downs or goal line or short yardage or whatever, Like that's pretty damn valuable for a 7th-round pick, especially in that kind of offense. And Henderson himself is very, very talented. So obviously he's a great dynasty pick, but I think he's a good redraft pick as well because there's a lot of touches to go around in this backfield. And now that Gurley's knee is in the state that it's in, more of those touches are going to go to the backups than maybe they would have in past years. So very, very good value in round 7 for him. And then moving on to round 8, we've got Jordan Howard, Latavius Murray, and Royce Freeman. All of these guys, again, are kind of like mid-tier handcuffs for Miles Sanders, Alvin Kamara, and Phillip Lindsay, respectively. All of them are not as talented as the starters at all. But if any of those starters get hurt, if Lindsay, he's not very big, so if he gets dinged up on a big hit, or Kamara, he's been fairly durable, but God forbid he goes down, or if Miles Sanders goes down, like all of those guys are in line for a pretty substantial workload, and all of them are also probably going to get a decent amount of goal line work as well. So they are rosterable as borderline flex players just for that alone, if you feel like they're going to get a lot of goal line touches relative to the smaller starting backs that are ahead of them on the depth chart, but at the very minimum, they're pretty good bets for handcuffs for all 3 of those guys, as well as goal line targets. So I feel really good about them in round 8 as like an RB4 type of guy. And then round 9, we got more handcuffs, and then kind of some. Again, I don't expect. I went over this a long time ago, but I don't expect Hunt to steal carries from Chubb. But if Chubb goes down, Hunt is easily an RB1. Like slot him in, no doubt about it. So that is worth a 9th-round pick alone as insurance for all Chubb owners. Ronald Jones is actually, I got to talk about him for a second. He's very frustrating to me because the Ronald Jones that's in Tampa is not the Ronald Jones that I saw at USC. I don't know what the abomination of Tampa Ronald Jones was last year, but that was not the same guy that I saw rip up Alabama for a 50 or 60 yard gain as a freshman. Like I don't know what the hell happened to that guy. And I know he put on a whole bunch of weight this offseason. I'm not even sure if that was a good idea because I never really saw him as a 215, 220 pound back. Like I never saw him being effective at that size. I saw him as being really more of a 200-pound slasher Phillip Lindsay kind of back, but without the receiving ability. And I don't know what to make of him. I might move him down because Peyton Barber is, you could argue, a better running back, but Jones is, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of talking myself out of it now that I think about it. I don't know. I might move him down. I've got him at round 9 for now, which is still lower or at his current ADP. Maybe I'll raise up Peyton and put him in a round 9 ADP and then flip Jones back to round 10. This Tampa backfield is just frustrating to me because I know that Jones should be a better player than he is. I saw him be a better player than he is. I don't know what's wrong with him, and I'm kind of hoping that this preseason will make me feel better about putting him in the 9th round. I still haven't taken him on any of my teams, even though I've had him graded as a 9th round pick. I've still been hesitant, so maybe I overranked him a little bit now that I think about it, but I think there's potential for him to slide way the hell down based on what I see in the next 3 to 4 weeks, because round 9 is probably the highest that I'm willing to go with him, because I have a lot of trust issues with him now because he just looked like a completely different player than what I saw in college, and it's very frustrating. So I'm going to monitor that Bucks backfield and maybe flip-flop Barber and Jones here, but for now, I'm just going to keep them where they are and hope for the best for Ronald because he should be better than what he is. I'll just say that. His rookie year was extraordinarily disappointing to me. Damian Harris, another rookie running back who I've got as a mid-tier handcuff to Sony Michel. If Michel gets banged up again, I think Harris can run this offense just as well as Michel in terms of being that bruising inside runner on power and inside zone and all that kind of stuff. And he's got breakaway speed just like Michel as well, if they clear him to the second level. So I think, the Harris versus Michel debate, I think they drafted Harris for the same reason that I'm drafting Harris, which is as insurance in case Sony gets hurt again. So I feel very comfortable about him as a high priority handcuff. I would only draft him in this 9th round if I already had Michel on the roster. But if you don't have Michel on the roster and he's sitting there in like round 10 or round 11, I would seriously consider picking him up, A, as trade bait to the Michel owner if Sony goes down, or B, just if you have injuries yourself and Sony goes down, all of a sudden you've got a slam dunk RB2 that you can plug into the lineup and feel good about it. So I really like Harris, the talent. His situation isn't the best, but I don't want to say if the stars align because that's wishing for injury, but if bad things happen that line up for him specifically, he will be very productive. Moving on to Jalen Samuels, again, high priority handcuff to James Conner. You could argue that maybe he's an even better receiver than Conner, just in terms of pure talent, but I think Conner is a better early down back, so Conner should get the majority workload in this offense. But, Samuels is still going to get his, and if James goes down for whatever reason, injuries happen, especially to running backs, Samuels is an easy automatic start for me. So all these kind of automatic start handcuffs are in a perfect spot in round 9. I feel very comfortable with all of them. And then Devin Singletary sort of fits into that category, but not really, because if anything, Singletary is not only a high priority handcuff if LaShawn McCoy goes down, but I actually have him rated ahead of LaShawn McCoy because I expect him to pass LaShawn McCoy on the depth chart eventually. Shady is one of the most talented backs to play in the last decade, but he's getting up there in years. Father Time is undefeated, and right now he's a 31-year-old running back who has struggled with, nicks and cuts and being banged up, especially with lower body injuries in the last few years, where even if he's played through some of them, he hasn't been really 100% in a while. So I think Singletary, he's ultra talented himself, extremely shifty, extremely loose hips. I love his slashing ability. He runs harder, and he's not the biggest dude in the world, but he runs hard behind his pads, harder than you would expect for somebody his size. And even if he's not, maybe as big of a speedster as some of the other backs in this class, like, he is so creative as a runner. He's such good vision, and he's so quick and so loose that I still think he could end up being one of the 2 or 3 most productive rookie running backs in this whole class. And I think eventually, not even eventually, I think within the first month of this season, he's going to be the starter in that backfield, even over 2 Hall of Famers in McCoy and Gore. I think they're really going to give it over to the young guy within the first month of the season because he's really, really that good. He's a phenomenal pick for them. I think they took him in the 3rd round. I had him graded right in the 3rd round, but I said at the time that I wouldn't be surprised if he was pushing for Rookie of the Year because he's a really, really, really damn talented running back. So I think round 9, perfect value for him. I think once people see what he's capable of in the preseason, he might even go higher than that, round 7, round 8. So if you are drafting this week, get him in the 9th while you can because that's probably the last time you're going to be able to. Moving on to round 10, again, we've got more handcuffs, maybe lower priority handcuffs, and then some older backs that could be getting some work here and there. I just talked about LaShawn McCoy. I've got him around lower than Singletary, but at the very least, McCoy might get some pretty substantial work, at least early in the season. Carlos Hyde, I think, is a very solid handcuff. Madison, I think, is a very, very underrated handcuff for Dalvin Cook. If Dalvin goes down, and he's also struggled with injuries in the past, so that's not totally inconceivable. Ito Smith, again, Devonta Freeman has struggled with injuries, so Ito is a solid, not spectacular, but solid handcuff for him. I would really be playing him more because of volume than pure talent. Freeman, to me, is a much better running back than Ito ever will be. But, if Freeman's not on the field, Ito's going to get all the carries, and I think he's still good enough to make something out of that. So he'll probably put up kind of low-end RB2 numbers as a handcuff if Devonta goes down. Barber, I already talked about when talking about Ronald Jones. I might end up flipping him with Ronald depending on what I see in the next few weeks. Same thing with Balaj, with Drake. Once I kind of figure out their backfield situation over the next few weeks, he could be moving way up or way down depending on that. At the very least, he'll probably get a pretty substantial amount of goal line work because I think he's got better natural power than Kenyon. But beyond that, for now, he's just a handcuff to me. Nyheim Hines is kind of a diet version of James White. If I was going to put it any way, that's probably the best way to put it. Primarily a pass catcher in that Colts offense. I think obviously Marlon Mack is going to get most or all of the early down work, but a significant chunk of that third down work will be Nyheim Hines. I think him catching probably 50 to 60 passes is not out of the realm of possibility. And if Marlon Mack goes down, and if Jordan Wilkins is also still a little bit banged up, which he tends to be banged up quite a bit, which is weird because he doesn't have that big of a workload, but he still gets banged up. But, Hines has been fairly durable, and if the guys ahead of him get hurt again, we could see him spike in overall touches fairly significantly. But at a minimum, I think he's going to be a very, very reliable pass catcher, probably get you 10 to 11 points a week, which is pretty stable in terms of flex value. So I think for a 10th round pick, getting someone who can put up double-digit points each and every week is pretty good value. Dion Lewis, same kind of thing. I think you can expect him to get somewhere between like 9 and 11 points a week, which is like a low-end flex, or also acting as a handcuff to Derrick Henry. I don't think he'll ever be as productive as a runner as Derrick Henry, but you could do a lot worse as a handcuff than him. And I think he is still going to be probably the main pass catching back in that offense as well. So round 10, a lot of handcuffs, some kind of low-end flex players specifically for PPR, and then some veterans that may or may not get some work here and there. And then round 11 plus, I don't even bother, doing differentiating between 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Like, this is the part of the draft where it's literally just you're taking flyers on guys. So I don't really feel the need to differentiate them by round because they're all essentially the same thing. The two main ones to pay attention to are Demarie Crockett and Karan Higdon in Houston. Right now, they are battling for that RB2 spot, especially because Foreman's gone. And either one of them, I think, could end up being a starter by the end of the year. So they are worth tracking. Even if you don't draft them, they are worth tracking on your waiver wires because there's a decent chance that they're going to end up being almost like a CJ Anderson this year, where they do nothing all year and then all of a sudden it's December and they win you a championship. So they are very much worth paying attention to. I don't know who's going to win that backup job yet. They're two kind of different running backs. Crockett is bigger, and I think he's also got better straight line speed, but Karan Higdon, I think, has better contact balance and is a little bit quicker. Not as big, but still really runs hard behind his pads. If I was the coaches, I would probably take Higdon over Crockett, but Crockett's been really, really good in camp, so yeah, it's pretty much up in the air right now. Full disclosure, I drafted Higdon in my Dynasty League because I think he's going to be around for a while, but that's just me. And then after that, you got the usual flyer suspects of Adrian Peterson, Matt Breida, Duke Johnson, Chris Thompson, Alfred Morris, all these guys who a lot has to happen for them to get significant playing time, but they are still worth having on your roster as like a just in case, break glass in case of emergency kind of play. Justice Hill, I kind of glossed over him for a second. He's a very intriguing running back to me. I had him, I believe, as my third-rated running back coming out of college this year when I did my pre-draft rankings. Ultra explosive. I think he's an even more explosive version of Kenyon Drake. And so if you told me that by like the midpoint of the season, he was Baltimore's primary passing down back instead of Mark Ingram, I would 100% believe you because I think he would be a hell of a lot more explosive and more effective as a receiver than Ingram, other than maybe if they want Ingram to stay in as a pass protector. Obviously, he's better than Justice Hill at that because Ingram's a really damn good pass protector. But just from a pure receiving standpoint, Hill, to me, is a much better receiver than Ingram ever was or ever will be. So he's definitely worth taking a flyer on, especially in this PPR format, because I think he can kind of carve out a role for himself there in the second half of the season. Breida, again, I don't know what to make of this San Francisco backfield, but he's worth rostering in case, a house falls on top of all the running backs ahead of him on the depth chart. He's got injury issues himself, but when he was on the field, he was very, very efficient. So he's worth taking a gamble on very, very late in the draft. And kind of working your way all the way down towards the bottom. You've got your Chase Edmonds as your David Johnson handcuff. You've got Tony Pollard as your Zeke handcuff. You've got Jamal Williams as your Aaron Jones handcuff, even though Jamal's dealing with injuries himself right now. It's just handcuff after handcuff, flyer after flyer. But as I mentioned earlier, all these names will end up on rosters in one form or another. Whether you draft them or whether you get them on the waiver wire, they're all going to be on teams. I can promise you that, especially in deeper leagues like 14-man and 16-man leagues. All of these guys are going to have a role to play. And some of them, I don't know which ones yet because it's kind of injury dependent and situation dependent, but some of them will end up winning you leagues. So they are all worth monitoring. And we're going to be paying attention to them for the next 3 to 4 weeks on this channel. We're going to be updating these rankings at every possible opportunity, both for PPR and then when the standard rankings come out early next week, and obviously when the combined rankings come out later this week as well. It's a lot of updates that we're going to be doing over, throughout the month of August, but there's going to be a lot that changes, especially once people start getting hurt. So it's an unfortunate part of fantasy, but it's a big part of fantasy. So we're going to be trying to keep you as updated as humanly possible as all these rankings shift around in major ways. But for that's going to wrap it up for the first draft of these 2019 running back rankings. If you want to get those continuous updates that I just talked about, feel free to go subscribe to my Patreon page. And also, when you are a patron, you can either, hit me up in the comments on Patreon or send me a message on Patreon, whatever you want to do. Shoot me your email. I'll add you to a continuously updated Google Sheet, which you can refer to a little bit easier. You can print it out and take it to your live draft, whatever you want to do. You'll get access to that Google Sheet if you're a patron. Any donation, even as low as $1 a month, will get you access to all that. Every single ranking, every single update, as well as monthly patron-only Q&A sessions, weekly game picks during the season, and a whole lot more coming in the future. So for only $1 a month, that's a lot of extra stuff that you get in addition to all the content and the film room episodes that I put out weekly on this channel. So hopefully all that sounds somewhat worth it to you. But if it's not worth it to you, well, I appreciate you watching this at least and giving me some Google ad money so that I can pay my mortgage. But I'll be back tomorrow with my first draft of the receiver rankings as well, which should be a similarly lengthy show. I'm still trying to finalize, even as I publish this today, what those rankings are. But we'll see how that goes. And then the day after that, I'll be touching on quarterbacks. And the day after that, the first day of preseason games, I'll be hitting all those tight ends. So hopefully you guys stick around for all 4 ranking specials. And hope you enjoyed it. And until tomorrow, later.